Welcome to This Team Is Killing Us, a podcast about what the Carolina Panthers do to good people. She is Lauren Brownlow. I am Dimitri Ravanos. We are giving you sort of a hybrid of our two usual situations this week, where I am in the studio and Lauren is remote. But more importantly, Lauren, what is killing me this week is you asked for a very specific thing in last week's episode as it relates to learning more about the evolution and development of Bryce Young's confidence. And we got everything but that from Joe Person.
I know. I know. It drove me crazy too, because I'm reading the whole story and I'm like, okay, when do we get to the sports psychologist? And there's nothing. And I'm like, okay.
So here's my question. Do you think that means there was no sports psychologist involved in this evolution? Or do you think that means that that part is still being played pretty close to the vest? Because you notice in this article, which is at The Athletic, everybody is quoted except Bryce Young.
Bryce. Yep. Well, it is worth remembering. I believe his dad is in the field of psychology, at least, right? And so it is possible, although I know, like, you're not, I guess, technically, like, ethically supposed to treat your family, but at least that background could probably have led to helping get him in a better mental place. And you can see throughout that piece, which I enjoyed very much, how, like, you know, his mentality and what he's projecting, you know, and everything like that, and just his own mentality, but also like what he's projecting outwardly in terms of his demeanor and things like that, how important that became. And I'm sure that the team itself told him that as well. So I don't think it was just, you know, it was just like his dad or whatever. But
that's one of the things that stood out to me is there were, and nobody outright said, hey, this kid is broken, but there were multiple like veterans that were quoted in this that really alluded to the fact that they could tell from the moment they got there, something looked off. Jadeveon Clowney is the only one that is like pointed out specifically as saying, I don't like the guy's body language during training camp last year. But Robert Hunt says that he, in the column, says that he could see the things that worked for Tua Tagovailoa, where, you know, Robert Hunt and he played together in Miami at the beginning of his career. Hunt said he could see the things that Tua got from being able to sit for the first 6 weeks of his career, and he noticed those things didn't exist in Bryce. Adam Thielen talked about the fact that, you know, it was kind of clear to him that Bryce didn't quite get that his body language said a lot to the rest of the team last season. You know, one of the things that stood out to me, and it's funny you bring up his dad, because I thought about how much in this situation, that dude specifically, I don't say this like facetiously at all, but how much specifically that dude might have needed his dad at the moment. Because what I took away from this in terms of Bryce's background was, this is a dude that is extremely talented. This is a dude that has played for two, and I'm assuming given Matter Day's success in high school football, he had a very good, very authoritative kind of coach, but he's played for those kind of people before. He has never really had to be the guy that was the emotional core of a team before. And that was part of a role, or part of this particular role, he just had no training for.
Yeah, I think that's interesting. That's an interesting way to look at it for sure. It did seem to me, I mean, granted, I didn't watch him as much as you at Alabama, but it did seem to me that his demeanor was very positive there. I mean, I guess it's easier to do when you're at Alabama compared to everyone you're playing in college football. But at the same time, like, it did strike me that he didn't mind taking on more of that load there. I think, but he probably had never played for a coach before that didn't believe in him. And so, and we all know Frank Reich didn't.
Right.
And so I wonder how much that little like mini trauma, as it were, didn't help. And then you're playing with all these schemes and with these players and these protections that aren't working, and you're getting hit a ton, and, you know, nothing's going the way you want it to. And so I wonder how much that played a role as well. Just like the fact that, you know, nothing was working and you're playing for a coach that doesn't want you. Like, he's not an idiot. Like, I'm sure he knew that.
And see, that's something where, like, how on earth could you ever prepare for that? Because that's something that is such an NFL specific phenomena, right? Like there's no athletic director at high school or college that is picking their coach's quarterback for them. There's nobody other than the head coach that is going to tell you who the team is invested in terms of various positions. So yeah, like I hear you. I just don't know how anybody could have been ready for that kind of situation.
Well, and when you're the number one pick, especially like you're the number one pick in the draft and you're playing for a coach who doesn't want you, that has to do a bit of a number on your mental state as well. And so, and look, I think that this article validated
a coach that doesn't want you, but the coach's boss is saying, I don't care, he's playing. And there's clearly, look, I still maintain, I don't think Frank Reich, like, took that job thinking he was going to get fired and get the buy. Like, I don't think he was not trying. I just think that Frank Reich was very much resigned to the fact that he couldn't do much with Bryce. And whether or not that's like technically true, I don't know. But I do think that Frank Reich believed that.
Yeah, for sure. I just think like, it does make a world of difference for sure if your boss, believes in you or not. And, like you said too, the Tepper thing is interesting because it's like that's almost like everyone knows that you're only playing because daddy says so or whatever, like
but not only that, the one dude that believes in you is the one dude we all agree is a fucking moron.
Yeah, but I do think the article validated a lot of that's not good, and everyone hates him.
Right.
Not good. And so you're lumped in with them as like your allies and you're like, I didn't ask for this. But I do think it validated a lot of what I thought about Canales as well and the coaching staff in that like it's not that they didn't like him or trust him. It's just they understood that he was going to need a lot of time.
Right.
And there was for sure a part of that article that absolutely floored me because I texted you about it because I was like, excuse me?
All right, so I'm going to let you lay out the details of it, but I will just say this part that you texted me, which was about when it was they were thinking about, okay, this is the plan to reinsert Bryce. What is in the article? And like I said, I'll let you reveal the details, but to me, it confirmed there was no plan. Not they didn't want to put him back in, just we are benching him and we have no idea what we're doing from there.
Well, remember, there was no long-term plan with that. It was just a matter, and I thought, I didn't know, to be honest. I had no idea. But when they put him back in with Andy's hand injury, I was suspicious because I remember being like a sprained thumb. Not that far be it from me to assume someone can play through a sprained thumb, but it did sound suspiciously like not that bad. And I'm like, I think they're just ready to like get Bryce back in there, but I don't understand. I didn't understand it at the time either. Cause I'm like, if you're going to sit him, why aren't you sitting him for longer? And apparently, and they've been working with him on all these things. Basically, in the article, they talked about that. They've been working on his footwork and how it corresponds to the play that's being called, which I thought was super fascinating, and all this other stuff, and just really working him through some stuff. And then Andy gets hurt, and they're like, well, we have to put him in now. Like, there was no choice at that point, which I thought there was. I thought it was a lie because I don't trust this team when it comes to injuries anymore. Sorry, they've lost that. They've lost any like benefit of the doubt with the ankle sprain.
100%. And that is why I think it is okay to kind of wonder, okay, why exactly do you believe there was a plan? Now, granted, that is largely
the plan was to bring him.
Hang on. Before we get there, that was largely a different administration, right? Like that. Aside
that's
from
true.
Pepper,
That's fair.
All the pieces have changed that would have made that decision. The other thing that I think is important to say before you reveal this part that both had us going like, what? No way, is nobody knew the direction any team in the NFL was going to go at the time they benched Bryce. So when you hear Lauren tell you when they thought, okay, maybe this made sense to reintroduce him, you will understand why I had some like reservations here.
The plan was to reintroduce him in the Panthers home game against the Super Bowl champion Kansas City Chiefs.
Well, sure,
Excuse me?
Look, everybody can win one Super Bowl. Surely the Chiefs got lucky and just won the one, right? There's no historic like precedent for them like prolonged greatness.
Oh my God. I wonder, you know what I wonder? If they thought like, okay, there's the only tape that's out there of Bryce is shit. We see
Oh.
him improving. You know, like we're going to just drop this big surprise right in their laps. But that's just using galaxy brain here, folks, because no, like what about what you're doing to Bryce to put him back in that spot?
Lauren, I'm gonna give you a different idea here. Now, remember that nobody knew what the state of the Giants was going to be. Nobody knew that the Saints were going to be in absolute disarray by week 9 when they played. So
we might have been able to assume about the Giants, to be fair, but yes,
maybe. But I think that if they were looking at week 12, like there is some institutional scars with this team that we're probably thinking like we'll be 1-9 by that point anyway. What does it matter if we lose that game?
Well, yeah, and I wonder if they were like, we'll put him back in. They won't know what hit him. They'll think he still sucks. We'll beat them, and everybody will be like, the Panthers are fine now. Right. And it's like, oh my God, you guys.
That kind of makes me wonder if so let's say things had gone the way they had gone. Let's say Andy was in there that whole time, and even without Bryce, they went the same way, where they beat the Saints, they beat the Giants, and they come into that game off of a bye week on a 2-game win streak. If I'm Dave Canales, I am fighting to push it back to keep the core intact that got us these wins.
That's the thing. You're flirting, like when you make it that late, like that early in the process, I feel like you're only leaving room for and you know what? Maybe they would have said, hey, like if Andy was not where they wanted, you know, if Andy was like playing well, and if Bryce wasn't maybe as far along as they wanted at that point, like maybe they say, okay, you know, like we'll keep this going, and maybe he sits until later in the, I don't know. Who the hell knows? Because it's also like the Chiefs, are y'all okay? Like someone said this willingly. What? Like someone said this.
You know, going back to the whole idea of we didn't know how the season was going to unfold. Like at that point, we don't even know that the Chiefs are in this series of like escape by the skin of your teeth kind of games where just maybe like your brother had talked about that week, just maybe the Panthers could pull one over on them. Another thing that happened this week that I wanted to bring up with you, and this is independent of Bryce, but you know, I've been thinking back on this season a lot this week as I watch other teams in the playoffs, and just kind of have to acknowledge, like, Lauren, you and I might owe DanMorgan an apology because we were pretty like flabbergasted by the return he was willing to accept for Diontae Johnson. And it seems like the Ravens in week whatever that was, 6, are the last team that might ever have or ever will want Diontae Johnson on their roster.
And you know, it's interesting actually, because he was mentioned in that article as well, in saying, and actually probably a relatively tame quote for him in terms of like being asked about like, are you surprised at the lack of downfield shots they'd been taking when Bryce Young was in there? And he's like, we're all surprised. I'll
tie these two things together, because as I read that and knew we were going to talk about Diontae Johnson getting cut by the Texans on the show today, I kind of wondered, like, was this a rare moment of whether it was his choice maturity or someone getting to him maturity of not really turning loose on Bryce the way he rightfully could have, and the fans would have been on his side after game number 2?
Yeah, maybe so. I mean, but clearly, like with all we've seen in the last, I don't know, couple, because like, listen, I liked the way Diontae had played. I thought he did some. I was a defender of his, like maybe, but what I think the last like couple months in his odyssey throughout the league has taught me, at least in part, is like, well, maybe you don't always see everything that goes on behind the scenes, and I do. It makes me wonder in hindsight, like how maybe that having that kind of presence, I guess, that they managed to keep under wraps, or maybe he did his best there. I mean, seemingly he had his most success there, but it seemed like something happened when they decided to make that trade. Clearly something happened. My thing was like, hey, he's very productive. Like, why are you only getting this back for him? But I think now we see why a little bit more, and that you actually, like you said, like you have to apologize a little bit because you're like, okay, well, you know, it ended up being like better than you could have hoped for, actually, in terms of that.
I really thought about like the whole journey of Johnson here, because if you remember, like it's basically a player swap with the Steelers of two players that each side is done with, right? And then I think didn't the Panthers kick in their 7th round or an extra 7th round pick that they had?
I didn't care about that. Yeah,
right.
I was like,
And so then basically what the trade to the Ravens ends up being is switching a 6th that the Panthers had to take the Ravens 5th. The Ravens have Deontay Johnson on the roster for 6 games. And in that time, Deontay Johnson played a total of 39 snaps. And they let him go for nothing after he refuses to go into a game in early December. They let him go for nothing. The Texans pick him up. He plays 2 games. The Texans are about to play the Chiefs in the divisional round of the playoffs, and he is just not worth the headache. So, look, tip of the hat.
Obviously, yeah.
Yeah, bought low, sold as high as he was going to get. It
Yeah.
seemed like.
Yeah, 100%. My bad. I didn't know, Dan. Sorry.
Another Dan Morgan move worth revisiting and tipping your hat to the guy. And I'm bringing all this up because this adds to, I think, the optimism a lot of us feel around this team, or at least the trajectory. I don't think anybody is going to argue that next year this should be a playoff team, but you definitely feel better at the end of this season than you did at the end of last season. I'm sorry, I cannot remember who put this on Twitter for me to dive in, but they were revisiting the trade that the Panthers made in round 3 of the draft last year, and that was giving up the 65th pick to the New York Jets. That pick ends up becoming Malachi Corley, a wide receiver, I believe, out of Western Michigan, if I remember right. Who
Western Kentucky. I looked before. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Highly touted in terms of that second tier, like the guys after Liggett and the Texas receivers. There was a sort of drop off, but still thought that he could do a lot. He was targeted 6 times all season long. Now, granted, the Jets had their share of problems with, let's say, how their offense was carried out on the field, the decision making in terms of distribution of passes, right? But Malachi Corley was targeted 6 times. He made 3 catches on those 6 targets. In return for the 65th pick, the Panthers got the 72nd pick, which became Trevin Wallace, 64 tackles, including 2 forced fumbles and 3 run stuffs, and the 157th pick in the 5th round. That was Shaw Smith-Wade, who started 4 games when he was supposed to barely see the field this year, 39 tackles and 1 each of interceptions, passes defensed, and forced fumbles. Like, again, this is part of the reason that I feel pretty good. Do I think Dan Morgan made that trade with those 2 dudes in mind with the picks that they got? No, but he made 2 pretty good picks.
Yes, I agree with you. I do have one. I have the slightest of quibbles with Dan. One involves something unrelated to that trade. So I'll table it for a sec. The other, because I did check the draft. I wanted to see, who was drafted between those picks as well. Was there anyone? And I clicked on some names, and like some guys did okay, some guys didn't do a whole lot, whatever. Fine. And some of them weren't in positions of need, so I just skipped it. So I'm like, whatever. There was one name on there, though, from a personal perspective, at least, that made my heart sink into my butt. And that was Chris Jenkins Jr. Oh, come on. He was right there. Oh, man, we could have had Chris Jenkins Jr. That's going to make me a little sad. I know that's probably not the most practical. Like, Derek Brown's playing well. Like, I get it. I understand. But, like,
But, and here's the other one, too, because I did think about this as I was putting the rundown together. Like, I know by that point you've already picked Jonathan Brooks. You are not going to pick.
That's the one I was going to bring up. Yeah.
But again, like, the Buccaneers get Bucky Irving in the middle of the 4th round, who ends up being one of the more productive rookie running backs this year. Like,
this was my whole point the whole time with the Brooks pick. It was the injury, and it was the fact that you can get a talented guy that can do stuff for you later. And they had bigger and more pressing immediate needs and so I feel I hate to feel like that over someone getting hurt. I don't want that. I'm not but I do feel at least somewhat validated of my critique of that pick, because I was like, no, why? No, don't do this. This is a second round pick. That's like gold. Like first and seconds, and to a certain degree thirds, but certainly first and seconds will get you starters. And so for me, I'm like, no. That's not the place for that. Do not do that. And I feel somewhat validated there, but for sure, a lot of other things that Dan has done, at times things I've questioned, at times things I haven't, but like a lot of things he's done that I've questioned too have worked out great. So I'm not going to like ding him too much over that. I understand at least the thought process behind it. And, I guess I'd rather you fall on your face a bit, like taking a chance as opposed to like just trying to play it safe. But like, still, I just was like, no. I didn't like it at the time. I obviously still don't like it. And I hope that he'll be okay.
Well, remember that, and this is more to the listener, not to you, Lauren. Like the draft is always a crapshoot. Yes. Nothing has happened until it's actually happened. I bring this up. I had a couple of people reach out and send me a mock draft from CBS this week. Actually, multiple mock drafts from CBS this week where like multiple people had picked Teteroa McMillan from Arizona at number 8 for the Carolina Panthers. And they were asking me like, what do you think about this? Why is this a popular pick? And the answer is, I don't know. Like, it doesn't make sense to me either. But remember, like, this is just a dude projecting probably who, like, in order, the best pick is. Like, there's no reason to think they're gonna target a wide receiver with a top 10 pick. There might not be a reason to think the Panthers are actually going to take a top 10 pick. The more I kind of look at the way the draft boards are falling. But again, nothing has happened yet. And you can't judge whether or not a pick is any good for a couple of years. I mean, think about RG3. Think about Eddie Lacy. These guys were both rookies of the year that fell off a table really quickly.
100%. And look, like there are definitely times when the Panthers in the past have gone with best available to them and like someone they really like and not cared that it wasn't a position of need. And sometimes those guys have worked out great. And so like, I'm not, even if they go with like, it's going to be hard, because what you never want if you're a GM, I'm sure, and certainly if you're a fan, but more so as a GM, you never want to be on one of those lists where it's like, oh, they passed on so-and-so. They could have drafted that guy, And so like, if you really believe in someone's like talent and upside and think that they're going to be a great, I get that it would be tough for you to be like, nah, we're good. Like, I do understand that. So
don't forget that we are closing in. January 31st is when we are at the Rialto for the Basketball Jones. Starring our friend Bomani Jones, Lauren Brownlow will be the host for the night. Ovius and Giglio are there. Marcus Ginyard is there. Tyler Hansborough, Lavelle Moten has just been added to the show. And our buddy Rod Morrow, The Black Guy Who Tips is the name of his podcast if you want to check that out. It is going to be a really fun night. Tickets are available at etix.com, or you can just go to the Rialto's website, therialto.com, click on the events tab, and you will see the Basketball Jones with Bomani Jones. And by the way, if you are not already an OG fan subscriber, no time like the present. Lauren and I have been talking about exactly what the off-season Panthers content looks like for OG fans. So you are going to be just as surprised as, or I should say, we are going to be just as surprised as you are every Monday morning when it comes to you. Plus, there is plenty of basketball coverage ramping up right now. Plenty of Carolina Hurricanes coverage there as well. Sign up for OG fans by going to ogtrianglemedia.com. Lauren Brownlow, you and I got called out on social media because of just how little we actually know about contracts inside the Panthers locker rooms.
I mean, yeah, guilty as charged.
Yeah,
sorry.
Agreed. We said, and admittedly incorrectly last week, that Wonnum and Clowney were both on 1-year prove-it deals. Technically incorrect. Both signed 2-year deals. However, I do want to point this out because this was sort of at the heart of what I was getting at.
The sentiment, yeah.
But I will acknowledge I was wrong.
Yeah.
Wonnum is not somebody that you could even really justify bringing back when you consider that it only is going to cost you $1.7 million against the cap to cut him. Would you not, Lauren, take that cap hit in order to avoid the $5 million that a dude that barely played this year is due?
Yeah, I mean, That's a tough one because I liked what I saw from him when he
Sure.
could play. And look, I will have to admit to everyone, and sorry, this is where me being a fan intersects somewhat with this podcast. Did I watch the defense as closely as some people? Probably not, because it was a tough watch for me. I'll just be honest. I had a hard time.
All right, so I wanna read parts of this comment we got from the Two Growls, One Roar podcast, who does a great job, and we appreciate that they follow us. And
thank you.
Yes, and I will, as soon as we get done recording, I will return the favor to be a man of my word. I do appreciate
same.
anybody in the Panthers content universe. But the point they made was that Wonnum was dealing with blood clots all year, and in the limited snaps he played, he was one of the most productive members of the defense. I will give you all of that. I will also tell you that this is a historically awful defense. Why would you bring any of them back, particularly one that is so easy to cut?
I don't know why. I don't know that we can say why would you bring any of them back.
My point is not that you cut everybody. My point is if you were good in limited action and you were dealing with what is going to be a recurring problem,
the cap space,
obvious cut to me. At 1.7 million cap hit, that's a no-brainer cut to me.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know. It's hard. I guess some of it, like what's going to go on with Shaq this offseason?
It's a good question. I mean, Shaq seems to be talking like he knows that he knows nothing right now about his future, right? Like that there is no certainty coming from anything you hear about Shaq.
And I think you can't feel certainty the other way either, in terms of like how much you're going to be able to rely on him from a health perspective. And I hate saying stuff like that, but it just is what it is, right? And so like considering things like that and and I do think for the most part, like linebacker was the position I was the happiest with this year in general. Like I thought they did the best job and they had the best personnel. And so I would hate to I don't know. I guess we just have to see how some of the cap situation shakes out too, and like see how much room they have. And if they can keep him, I think that's okay to do. And I don't think it's the worst thing to reward a guy who, played well for you when he could, as long as his long-term health is going to be okay and he'll be all right. Then I think it's okay to, if they have the space and can do it, like to bring someone like that back. But I think there's just a lot that stays up in the air right now in terms of like, who are they going to sign in free agency? Like who could they trade for? Who are they going to draft? Things like that. And so, if they have the space for him, I wouldn't have a huge issue if they kept him, but I hear you because that's a big difference for sure in the cap.
Yeah. I mean, my thought is you're kind of right in the middle in terms of cap space. They rank 20th in the NFL in terms of what money they have available to the cap. I think you've got to not think about sentimentality or what is fair or what a guy earns, and you just have to be bold about this in order to have the wiggle room you need to improve as much as you need to on that side of the ball.
I don't even think it's so much sentimentality. It's also like, a good player on the defense, so there's that aspect too. And like, but you do have to assess it in terms of like, what can he bring in terms of like game changing ability? Do you think that that's worth it? And at the end of the day, that's the assessment they're going to have to make. I don't really know that I can give a great answer to that because I think that there are individuals on that defense that played well. Obviously it was a hot ass mess. And so like, it's just, like, to use a football term. Okay.
Yeah. I mean, there was no Frankie Louvu on the defense this season where you could say, God, everything is bad. But that guy is always running at 100.
And it wasn't as bad. It was not as bad that year. It was not as bad.
Of course, but even when things were going bad, like you say, you missed him so much. Like you could always count on Frankie to be that dude that was going to run through everybody to make a play. That guy didn't exist.
That's what's tough for me too.
Good players on the defense are fine. Letting go of good players to get great players is what is necessary. And I don't know that this team, unless you are able to just throw so much more money at a guy than anyone else would, I don't know that there's any reason a great player would consider the Panthers.
I mean, I don't know. Maybe, Bryce probably did some wonders for the
Sure.
Panthers PR moving forward, because now I think a lot of potential free agents will look at that situation, look for Dave Canales, who I think has a pretty good reputation. I
Yeah.
think it's seemingly among, players as like being a players type coach and one that people like playing for. And so,
Mhm.
In that sense, like, uh, maybe that does help a little bit. But I mean, I hear you. I think, but also like when you bring up Frankie, that does tug at me a little bit in the other way, because I'm like, well, Wonnum played his ass off when he could. And like, they just cut a dude who did. And like, Frankie leaving isn't the reason the defense sucked, but like, having a guy like that just went in there and like, got strip sacks and just made big
Mhm.
plays when they needed them. That's a hard thing to just like, you can get a super talented player like
Sure.
on paper that does all the things you want, but maybe doesn't make plays. Like, I love guys like that. I'm just a
Mhm.
sucker for guys like that. So I don't know. We'll see. I mean, I hear you. You make a not bad point, of course, but I guess it'll all just like, basically they had some cap space last year, but they spent it all on the offense. I
Right.
mean, all of it. Like
Right. Which is
almost
what they
all of it.
probably had to do based on the 23.
Mhm. So maybe if they make tough decisions this year, maybe they focus a little more on that side.
Yeah.
Not on the O line for sure, but maybe else. What's Ian Thomas doing? Can we?
Listen,
Sorry, no offense to Ian. I'm sure he's a lovely human. I
given
can.
what we saw out of Jatavian Sanders this year,
Yes,
Ian,
yes, and Tommy
Tommy,
Tremble as well. Yeah,
Felipe Franks, like, guys, I hope you
we don't
love
need four of
Charlotte. We
those.
would love for you to come back and visit sometime. But
Well,
we
I
have
literally
moved on.
every time he did anything this year, I always would forget he's still on the roster because
Yeah.
he's one of the only holdovers from
Yeah.
like the past. And
Right.
I remember thinking he was going to be this amazing player,
Yeah.
and really take the next steps. And that just didn't ever really happen for him. And now it's like he's basically invisible, except he catches a pass every now. Like, what are we still doing here? I don't know his situation. I don't know if he's like cuttable necessarily, but like,
He's an unrestricted free agent.
okay, bon voyage, like, so long, farewell. No offense, buddy. You nothing. You didn't do anything wrong except just not. I don't know. Whatever. It's fine.
No, I hear you. I want to wrap here by sort of just letting you cook on, because we did not talk about the fact that both Smitty and LukeKuechley are finalists among the 15 modern era players that are eligible for Hall of Fame induction. Eric Allen, Jared Allen, Willie Anderson, Jahari Evans, Antonio Gates, our friend Torrey Holt, Eli Manning, Terrell Suggs, Fred Taylor, Adam Vinatieri, Reggie Wayne, Darren Woodson, and Marshall Yanda are the other nominees. Lauren, do you feel good about either Smitty or Kuechly getting it?
No. I
Keep
want
in mind,
to.
I believe this is the first time for both of them on the ballot, or at least as a finalist.
Yes. You just said the biggest reason why I don't feel
Okay.
great. Is the first time. I mean, the NFL isn't as baseball-y with that necessarily, but they do have that tendency. And I know that Smitty has better numbers than like a Torrey Holt and some of the other wideouts on that list, but let's be honest, like those Reggie Wayne and Torrey Holt, and especially Torrey, like Torrey should have been in already,
Mhm.
And I'm not saying they would only take one receiver, but they do tend to kind of go like that. They don't, they will tend to sort of pick one
Yeah.
of a certain, group of positions or whatever.
It would have to be an extraordinary class for multiple receivers to go in. I think we've seen that be true over the last few years.
Yes, and so to me, I tend to think I'm not voting. And I love Smitty. You know this. I have threatened to fight people before him. Not in a while, just to be clear. But like I think he gets in on the first time he's a finalist. I hate it because I actually think this class is like this finalist group is kind of conducive to it, but and as more guys get in with more and more inflated numbers, I worry for him in the future. But I just think, and then for Luke as well, when you look at a guy like Suggs, that's a tough one. Suggs is getting in before Kuechly, I think, and it's weird. I mean,
so? even with the personality stuff,
Suggs. I mean, but they've put people in spite of that.
I am
he was such a big part of that era of the
No,
Ravens.
I hear you. I'm sort of doing not just the Suggs. I'm doing the Suggs versus Kuechly calculus there of who goes in first, not of who deserves which more.
Now,
I mean,
I'll say this, no offense to Luke, who I also love.
sure.
If he got in before Smitty, I would be very upset.
I would say, as somebody that, like, this was obviously not my era of Panthers fandom, but and let's remove Smitty. Let's just talk about Luke within the context of other linebackers.
Yeah. That's fair.
I thought Luke at his best was more firmly entrenched amongst the top 2, 3, or 4 of his position than Terrell Suggs ever was. And I mean,
I would have to,
matter. I mean, like, if you're talking about receivers, if you were talking about the 3 wide receivers amongst the finalists this year, Wayne, Holt, and Smitty, if you want to say, hey, one of these things is not like the other in terms of achieving the ultimate prize of a Super Bowl, okay, fine. I don't think you do that with defensive positions.
Yeah, the one thing I would say, I was going to say for a wide receiver anyway, like the one thing that could work against them and maybe has in Torrey's case a little bit is like Isaac Bruce. And then, you know, Reggie Wayne had a lot of help in Indianapolis. And Smitty, you can look at some of the roster Smitty played with. Right. After Muhsin Muhammad was gone, y'all, the list is comical. It will literally make you laugh and not in a funny way. But with Luke, you know, I think like with Suggs though, I always identified him as being kind of like, and this maybe plays a role too from an intangible perspective, like one of the hearts and souls of that defense and one of the playmakers and stuff. So I'm not saying that, you know, there's no chance, and maybe the personality stuff helps Luke in that way. But I just think like a higher profile team that won Super Bowls and all that stuff, it's just hard for me to think that he doesn't get some recognition over Luke, but we'll see. I'm never super optimistic. I mean, Peppers was such a no-brainer that I wasn't worried about it ever. But, you know, anybody else that wasn't like an otherworldly talent, I do have concerns, like just that they would make it, and not because of just like small market or whatever, but also because there's no Super Bowls to put next to them.
I guess tip of the hat to Jared Allen too, who had a cup of coffee with the Carolina Panthers. Let's not
yes, he did
leave him out.
I enjoyed him here. I will be honest. I was surprised because I was like, oh God. And then he comes in and I'm like, he played well. I liked him.
Can I a guy that I think I know that it would be first time to get to this point. I don't know that until we got that whole era of like Rob Gronkowski is the standard for tight ends.
Gates got to go in.
I was about to say, I don't know that I could ever remember before that one dude so far ahead of the rest of the league at that position than Antonio Gates. And remember, like at that point, Tony Gonzalez is still playing.
Yes. To me, Gates is and that was the first of the, do you know he played basketball? Even though Tony Gonzalez also played basketball. And like we just... but it was also like, I don't know, it was like this whole thing of like, yeah, he played basketball as well with Gates. And then it started a slew of those where even like Jimmy Graham from Miami, who PS played basketball most of his college career. Like that wasn't the whole like 2 sport guy. Like he like picked it up later in college. It was actually wild. Right. And a New Orleans, I have been happier to see fewer Saints retire than Jimmy Graham, but I did not like him at all as a football personality. Get out of here. But like, anyway, I mean, Gates, I thought really kind of like helped springboard that era. And obviously Tony's a Hall of Famer. Like no one would question that, but like he was like one of Phillip Rivers' like most reliable guys. He could stretch the field too in a way that I don't know that we always saw Tony do and make like big plays. And that was when you were kind of like, a tight end can do that. Yeah,
it's not that Phillip didn't play with some good receivers in San Diego. It is that Antonio was always one of his better receivers. Like other guys came and went, but Antonio was there for so long. I also really hope Fred Taylor gets in.
I'd like to see that. Yeah,
it just really felt like that dude was so good for so long. Talk about talk about a franchise during the time that he played for the Jaguars. Talk about a franchise that rode the roller coaster of 4 wins one year, divisional round the next year. Like, I would really like to see that guy get into the Hall of Fame.
I mean, and look, does my animal brain want Smitty in over those wide receivers? 100%.
Of course.
And they can go play somewhere else. I don't care about you. But my football and my human brain a little bit, like, I know Torrey. Torrey's a lovely guy. And I also believe, like, and I've always liked Reggie Wayne as well. You know, I used to root for Peyton Manning and the Colts when the Panthers were long gone, which was most years. Well, not always though, because they would always lose to the Patriots, and I'd always be like, "Oh, not the stupid Patriots again! I hate Tom Brady's face. Like, get out of here." Having to listen to him on a game this past weekend too was just not fun. It's not a good time.
See, this is what you are just saying. Like, it just dawned on me, like, Adam Vinatieri may be a lock, right? Like, to have a ceremony where you can have an induction done together by Peyton and Tom Brady.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah. I mean, if a kicker's gonna get in, it would be him, and probably should be.
Yeah.
It's not too soon for me at all. It'll be fine. Like, imagine a Hall of Fame class I have to watch walk in where it's Vinatieri who beat us in that Super Bowl. Steve Smith's not in there, and I have to just be sad and cry a little to myself.
But hey, obvious Hall of Famer Eli Manning's going to get in on the first ballot. Doesn't that make you feel good?
Oh boy, the takes will flow either way.
Yeah.
Either way that ballot goes, the takes are going to go crazy for that.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, maybe they should make a playoff Hall of Fame. Like, if you made a playoff Hall of Fame for the NBA, I'd put like Robert Horry in it, but for no other Hall of Fame,
right?
You know.
No, I think that's fine. Like, Bomani has long had this theory that the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is really done off albums. Like, Guns N' Roses is largely in for 2 albums that they made, not an entire career. Like, sports should echo that in some way, where it's like, hey, you're not in the Hall of Fame, but like, Mark Rippon had one unbelievable season that deserves to be acknowledged. Michael Vick is probably not a Hall of Famer, but for 3 years, we had never seen anything like that deserves to be acknowledged.
Right. Like, you had a moment in time that was significant in the history of the sport.
Yeah.
And I think, like, actually, that's not the worst philosophy to have, really, because it's almost like a marker. And in that logic, in that universe that we live in, which we don't actually live in, sadly, but then that puts Cam Newton firmly in. Yeah. But we don't live in that world. So